Yes, here we go. People are coming. Hello, people. Hello, global people. Welcome, welcome. Should we warm up, Lauren and Joel, should we warm up the chat? Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Will from the UK. It's pretty chilly here. I'm talking about the weather. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Will at Macmillan Education. I'm joined by Lauren Flemming and Joel Wotten. Do you want to introduce yourselves quickly, guys?
Sure.
Joel, I'll let you go first.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure I've spoken to some people out there in the world before. If not, I'm Joel. I here on behalf of Macmillan Education. I'll be talking to you a little bit later after Lauren's talk about Gateway to the World and our virtual classroom exchange.
And hi, everybody. I am Lauren Flemming. I'm coming from Los Angeles, California in the US, bright and early. And I'll be representing Empatico. I am the educator community manager at Empatico. And personally, I'm super excited to be here. I previously taught in the English language development world. So I'm super excited to be back here.
Great to have you, Lauren. Thanks so much for joining us. And Joel, great to have you.
I know, well, you see me every day, Will, so you know, you're not.
Yeah, well, it's great for them. It's great for the audience, at least, isn't it, to have you here? I get the privilege every day, so I'm less grateful than they are, probably. Good stuff. Well, everyone, so that's who we are. If you're feeling sociable, please do whack something in the chat, say hi, say where you're from, anything. That I said something about the weather, you can say an adjective describing your feelings if you want, just to warm up your fingers to get involved in the chat. It's rare that we get to sort of just say hi to random people from around the world. It's a rare privilege, so feel free to get all warmed up there. I'm going to be handing over to Lauren really soon, and Joel will be joining us after Lauren's session. But before we do, let me share my screen. Dramatic pause while I set things up. Can you see that, Lauren and Joel? Can you see that? Can you see Lauren's picture on the screen?
Indeed. Yeah.
Nice in my face, yes.
Great, good stuff. Okay, so welcome, world, crossing the cultural exchange. It's a really exciting session today. Something different to what we usually have. So Lauren has been working in ELT, but actually this session is sort of being delivered from Lauren from without the ELT industry, I would say, which is not something we usually do. And it's just going to be really interesting to look at intercultural communication from that perspective, specifically looking at empathy when communicating across cultures. Before I hand over to Lauren, I wanted to let you know that this session you're at today is part of a wider academic program. I'm sure you're aware of it, but you might not be. So just so you know, the Advancing Learning Academic Program is a series of completely free live webinars like one you're watching right now. All of the webinar recordings are available on the website. We've got blog articles, a whole field of teaching resources available. We've got a podcast as well. And it's all doing as much as we can basically to inspire great teaching and to advance learning via you, the teachers, the teachers on the ground doing all the work. And yeah, so it's all there for you as much as you like. macmillanenglish.com/ALAP, Advancing Learning Academic Program, or just scan that QR code and it'll take you straight there. Before you ask, you will get a certificate for the session today. It will have your name printed on it if you're watching on Zoom. If you're watching on Facebook, there should be a link coming at the end of the session for you to get your certificate as well. But that will be coming in an email in about within the next week. So it probably won't come tomorrow. I'll tell you that much. It won't come tomorrow. It'll be within the next week if you're watching on Zoom. So please do look out for that. We're nearly there. I'm going to stop babbling about everything else now and start focusing on today's session. So Lauren, welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us at an hour earlier than you originally thought. At 6 o'clock in the morning in LA. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And time is invented, so it doesn't matter what time it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Darkness and light is sort of personal preference after that, really, isn't it? And time has just been invented. Okay, so Lauren, as we've already spoken about, you were a previous educator. You worked in English language teaching before. Did you love it?
I did. I absolutely loved it. So I was teaching in northern Spain in Bilbao for about 6 years, and taught English to all levels, kids from, I think my youngest student was like 6 years old up to 75. And I just absolutely loved not only like teaching, but also building those relationships and seeing how English and having that common language could help build those relationships inside and outside of the classroom. I loved it. I do miss it a little bit.
Right. And working for Empatico, your whole sort of industry that you're involved in now is all about creating, I suppose, cultural connections or crossing barriers of whatever cultures differences there might be. And we had a session from Travis this morning, who's based in Connecticut. So I'm judging by that, I'm guessing Empatico is spread across various places. And so you need to use these skills on a daily basis, as do Joel and I. So I think you're in a really good position, obviously, to be, well, working for Empatico as well, but you're in a great position to be talking about this today. Really can't wait to see it. Joel, should we take our leave and pop back in about 45 minutes or so?
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Have a lovely session, Lauren. Have a great session, everyone. See you later.
Okay, thank you. I will dramatic pause, take over the screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, if I could just get a thumbs up in the chat or a yes that you can see my screen. It should be the cover screen with my name on it, Lauren Flemming, Empatico. Awesome, I see a yes in there. Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren, and I am the Educator Community Manager at Empatico, which is a free platform for educators to connect with classrooms around the world through virtual exchanges, and that ultimately builds students' empathy. I'm super excited to be here with you all today for our session, Crossing the Cultural Exchange. And thank you again to the Macmillan team for having me today. First things first, here is a quick overview of what I will be sharing today and kind of exploring with you all. First, we'll talk a little bit about cross-cultural communication and why we think it's especially important for students to practice today. Then I want to talk a bit about empathy, which is core to Empatico's mission and how empathy relates to cross-cultural exchanges. We'll dive into a framework that we use at Empatico to help us think more deeply about empathy, including 9 empathy-related skills. And then I'll share some specific tips for practicing those skills, especially through cross-cultural communication and exchanges that you all can go off and use immediately in the classroom with your students. So to start, cross-cultural communication. Why is it important? What is it and why is it important? Cross-cultural communication or intercultural communication is defined as communication between participants from different cultures. Not only can vocabulary be different, but communication styles, ways to address the other person that you're speaking with, and even norms regarding taking turns in a conversation can all differ depending on cultural norms. It's also important to remember that culture is active and changes as we experience, and effective cross-cultural communication does require reflection. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, many were already talking about the benefits and importance of cross-cultural communication in a world with increasing opportunities to meet others from diverse backgrounds and perspectives in social settings, business settings, etc. But in the COVID-19 pandemic, I think that further highlighted the actual need for cross-cultural communication. With the pandemic, we've seen an amplification of social inequalities and vulnerabilities, a rise of xenophobia and ethnocultural racism, a rise in gender-based violence, and rising discrimination against non-citizens. Educators specifically have seen heightened feelings of being misunderstood, isolation and abandonment, anxiety and depression amongst our students. And we're all seeing educators leaving the profession due to teacher burnout at rates that we haven't seen historically before. And, here today we're talking about cross-cultural communication. And while cross-cultural communication will not solve these issues that we have seen, developing those cross-cultural communication skills creates a space to address them from a place of inclusion, empowerment, and respect for all. And we at Empatico believe that empathy is the base of cross-cultural communication. For any Spanish speakers out there, empático, empathy, it all rolls right in there together. So what is empathy? Let's talk a little bit about empathy first, just to get started. It feels like it's become such a buzzword right now, but what exactly is empathy? Everyone's definition of empathy might be a little bit different. So we're going to do a brief warm-up together so we can start bringing some shape to our collective understanding of this concept of empathy. I want everybody to take a couple seconds and consider this essential question. What are a few words that you associate with empathy? Go ahead and enter your words into the chat. You can answer any of these questions here. We've got, what does empathy mean to you? What words do you associate with empathy? What does empathy look like? And what does empathy feel like when you think about empathy? I see caring, support, contact, compassion, understanding, placing yourself in someone else's shoes. These are all great. And I'm seeing quite a few connections amongst everybody. We've got caring, support, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, respect, being seen, seeing someone else. That sounds like we all have a very similar idea and a very similar feeling that comes to mind when we think about empathy, tolerance, care for others. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing those words that come to mind when you think about empathy. It's really cool to see that, we already mentioned that we've got so many people from all over the world here today joining us. And it's awesome to see that word, that concept of empathy, we have very, very similar ideas no matter where we are. It's that idea of caring, support, putting ourselves in others' shoes. Excuse me. And in recent years, researchers have landed on something like this definition. Empathy is a multidimensional phenomenon that allows us to feel what others are feeling, understand what others think and feel, and acting on those feelings and understandings. Empathy can decrease prejudice and bias. It can reduce conflict, bullying, and school violence. It fosters a sense of purpose to help others. It helps to identify one's own emotions and those of others. And it promotes positive relationships, which ties directly into building those cross-cultural communication skills, which is what we're here to talk about today. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into how we define empathy. I've got a quote here that really, really speaks to us at Empatico about empathy and kind of encompasses those ideas, that idea of empathy. Empathy is produced not only by how we perceive information, but also how we understand that information. So cognitive empathy, are moved by it, emotional empathy, and use it to motivate our behavior, behavioral empathy. As the research literature in education, psychology, sociology, conflict resolution, and communication demonstrates, empathy is a multidimensional phenomenon. It actually encompasses 3 distinct domains. We have the emotional, feeling what others feel. We saw that in the chat there. The cognitive, understanding what others think and feel. We also saw that in the chat. And the behavioral, acting on those feelings and understandings. These 3 domains illustrate a whole child or a whole student or a whole person approach to social learning. Then within those 3 domains, empathy research highlights 3 levels of application or interaction. We have the intrapersonal, the self and empathetic relationship with oneself, the interpersonal, individual others or an individual's relationship with other individuals, and the intergroup or an individual's relationship with collectives or groups of people who are different from one's own group. I want to come back to these 3 domains of empathy and 3 levels of interaction. But first, before we do that, I want to go a little bit deeper into the intergroup interactions and how that ties into cross-cultural communication. We've got the intergroup empathy gap is what I want to focus on really quickly before we move forward. When talking about empathy in the context of cross-cultural communication, it's really important to remember the intergroup empathy gap. While it might be easier to demonstrate empathy towards people who we think are similar to us or people who we trust or are in group, it can be more challenging to demonstrate empathy towards people who we think are different from us or are out group, that us, them. This drives what researchers call the intergroup empathy gap, which can lead to division and increased prejudice and bias towards members of different identity groups. We're probably all familiar with this experience, seeing the divides in the world today across political, racial, ethnic, and geographic lines. Even digital and social media tools that were created to connect us, they were initially created to connect us, they can actually lead to disconnection and create this empathy gap or further this empathy gap. These tools can also reinforce stereotypes and keep us refined in our bubbles if we're not careful and conscious. So the need to bridge this intergroup empathy gap directly ties into the need to develop cross-cultural communication skills. We at Empatico are actively working to help close that intergroup empathy gap, and we've developed what we call an empathy framework to help students build empathy and support those cross-cultural communication skills. To break this down, to break empathy down, and get really specific about how we and our students can become more well-rounded, empathetic individuals, we've developed what we're calling an empathy framework, which you'll see here on the screen right now. You'll see this 3x3 grid. The 3 dimensions of empathy are in there: the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral, and the 3 rings demonstrating the levels of interaction: the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, and the intergroup. You can see here that there are 9 key skills in total to practice in order to build empathy amongst our students. And all of these skills combined allow us to connect with others, develop a deeper understanding of ourselves, others, and the world, and act with compassion, which are all necessary for cross-cultural communication. Let's take a look more closely at emotional empathy, or feeling what others feel. Again, this was one that I think a lot of us, this came to mind when we were talking about empathy in the chat. We have at the intrapersonal level, we have mindfulness, or the ability to maintain a moment-to-moment awareness of our own thoughts and feelings. Mindfulness promotes emotional well-being and can improve one's own mental and emotional health, making it possible to better connect with and help others. At the interpersonal level, emotion recognition means recognizing the mood, feelings, or emotions of another person, which is a crucial prerequisite for being able to show an appropriate emotional response to support or help others. Again, that idea of supporting, connecting, and helping others. And then finally, at the intergroup level, diplomacy also helps us be more aware of others' emotions and helps us regulate and manage our emotions, but especially as we're interacting with those who have different backgrounds, perspectives, or experiences from our own. When we think about diplomacy, diplomacy is more about being open to others' emotions and recognizing or managing those emotions, especially in intercultural, intergroup settings. And when I say manage, I mean like navigate, not necessarily control, but navigate those emotions. Next, let's look more closely at cognitive empathy, or understanding what others think. At the intrapersonal level, there at the kind of the inner circle, we have self-awareness. And self-awareness is similar to mindfulness, but more about the ability to understand our own thoughts and values and how they influence our behaviors in different contexts. Self-awareness is a foundational skill for other empathy-related skills. And in fact, recent studies have shown that the more self-aware children are, the greater their perspective taking skills. Next, in that kind of middle circle area at the interpersonal level, we have perspective taking, or imagining the thoughts and experiences of another person. It might be how a lot of us define and think about empathy. We definitely saw a little bit of that in the chat there, and it's a skill that can be trained and reinforced throughout one's own life. And that's especially why it's important to start with our youngest students, but to also continue practicing this for all of us as we get older and navigate this world. And then in that outer circle at the intergroup level, we take this idea a step further by practicing inclusivity, or recognizing members of different groups as humans who have diverse perspectives and who are worthy of our empathy. Inclusivity is about proactively including other groups and their perspectives. And finally, let's look more closely at behavioral empathy, or taking action to help others. Recent research has shown that behavioral empathy has its own motivations, distinct from cognitive and emotional empathy. And that's a basic desire to help or protect nearby others, as well as oneself and one's community. Then let's take a look at that kind of inner circle again. At the intrapersonal level, self-care is a foundational skill, as we need to take time to care for others for ourselves in order to have the capacity and energy to reach out and help others. That's a good reminder that, again, we always need to take care of ourselves in order to be able to extend and help others. Think about that metaphor of, when you're on a plane and they tell you if that oxygen mask comes down to put your own oxygen mask on first before putting on the person that's next to you before putting on their oxygen mask. That's this idea here, making sure that you're taking care of yourself first in order to take care of others after that. At the interpersonal level, kindness is all about helping others. Kindness can be most effective in combination with emotional and cognitive empathy, as knowing what others need and feeling their distress can motivate our own kind behaviors. Research also demonstrates that being kind towards others can lead to better and stronger mental and physical health, relationships, and life satisfaction, all great benefits. And then finally, at the intergroup level, collaboration extends our kindness and willingness to help not only those in our own social group, but members of other groups as well. Collaboration is a key part of empathy, as it involves working with others to make a positive difference in the world. Collaboration can also involve related skills like respectful communication, active and compassionate listening, conflict resolution, and problem solving. Now let's take a look at what does this look like in practice? What does practicing these skills look like in practice? How can we work on building these skills to build empathy amongst our students to make cross-cultural exchanges enriching for all of those involved? That's why we're here today to talk about this. What are some things that we can do to help students build these skills? So to foster emotional empathy, the key skills we want to build are mindfulness, emotion recognition, and diplomacy. Those were those different areas in the inner, the middle space, and the outer circle. To build mindfulness, as educators, we can nurture positive feelings about a cross-cultural experience like excitement and curiosity. If students are feeling nervous about the exchange, research shows that about any type of virtual exchange, or even if you're in your classroom and you have an in-person exchange with different students, research shows that an imagination conversation or encouraging students to take a few minutes to imagine a positive, friendly, cross-cultural experience can help calm those nerves and lead to more productive exchanges or interactions. Mindfulness skills can be reinforced in the classroom through mindful meditations, through movement, through breathing, or even journaling at the beginning of the school day or between lessons to give students a quick brain break. And also all of those journaling, all of those are great ways to practice language development as well. Next, to build emotion recognition, encouraging students to take time to observe, recognize, and honor the mood, feelings, or emotions of their peers during a cross-cultural exchange will really help to build that emotion recognition. You can, as educators, you can also model this skill in your own classroom by recognizing, naming, and acknowledging students' emotions day to day. And on that note, research shows that adults, like educators, play a primary role in helping students develop empathy by serving as empathy role models for all of these 9 skills that we're discussing today. Then to build diplomacy skills, encourage students to be sensitive to different opinions, beliefs, feelings, norms, and ideas across cultures. When engaged in cross-cultural communication, encourage students to remain open to differences, recognize those nuances and those differences, and to show kindness and tact in their communication. For example, if students feel negatively or have a negative reaction to something their peers share, help them reframe those negative emotions with kindness and curiosity by asking questions and making "I wonder" comments. I think often we think about diplomacy in kind of the political context, in the international relations context, But if you think about diplomacy, it really is kind of navigating those relationships between people. And it can happen at an international level, a political level, but it can also happen on a much more individual level in our cross-cultural communication spaces. Excuse me. Next up, cognitive empathy. As a reminder, to foster cognitive empathy, we want to build self-awareness, perspective taking, and inclusivity. To build self-awareness, help students explore and reflect on their own identities, such as their family backgrounds, cultural traditions, hobbies, and more, and then consider what makes them unique. Help them consider what their own background and experiences may lead them to have different opinions or viewpoints from their peers. And one way to do this is by having students create cultural identity trees, where different parts of the tree represent students' major accomplishments, hopes and dreams, strengths, values, and other aspects of their identity. Excuse me. Finally, in cross-cultural exchanges, encourage students to share their personal stories with each other, which can help build trust and mutual understanding. They might even share something like a cultural identity tree with each other. And again, thinking about this also in the context of a language learning classroom, these are all great ways to practice learning that language as well. Excuse me, I need a sip of water for 1 second. Thank you. Next up, to build perspective taking, encourage students to seek others' experiences when engaging in cross-cultural dialogue, especially in the context of problem solving. Excuse me. Let's say that your class is working on a project exploring ways to address community challenges. It's important for students to explore, excuse me, how different people are affected by the same issue. Prompt them to reflect on what might limit their understanding of how others experience a particular challenge and what they can do to incorporate those perspectives into that problem-solving process. And ask students to think about why peers may have a different point of view and help them learn to appreciate those differences. Encourage students to ask questions rather than make assumptions about how others feel or think and why. And one simple way to have students practice perspective taking day to day in your classroom is during reading activities, where you can prompt students to consider a character's thoughts and feelings, or how a character might act next based on what they know about the character's background and experiences. And again, these are all great ways to practice language learning as well, and that can be incorporated into a language learning classroom. Finally, to build inclusivity, encourage students to see how all human beings in the world have inherent worth with strength to share and opportunities to grow. Frame cross-cultural exchanges as opportunities to learn from and with one another, rather than seeing their partners as subjects or topics to learn about. Remind students of their common humanity to decrease any power language that may be showing up, anything showing that they feel inferior or superior to their partners. Try and avoid comparisons like we are better or more fortunate, which actually hinder empathy in the long run and motivate students to learn about others' strengths. And finally, to foster behavioral empathy, we want to build self-care, kindness, and collaboration. To build self-care skills, encourage students to practice self-compassion during these cross-cultural activities. Remind them that bridging differences is something that takes a lifetime of practice, and that it's important to be kind to yourself when you are learning and trying something new. Encourage students to see how all human beings in the world, including themselves, have inherent worth with strengths to share and opportunities to grow. And this is also a great area to really model that for students. Practice it for yourself, and then also continue to encourage your students to build those self-care skills. To build kindness, discuss, model, and celebrate respectful communication and behavior norms. Encourage students to think about how the differences they discover can be things their peers celebrate about themselves, and to show kindness when they talk about them, kindness and curiosity. For example, you might ask, how would you like people to acknowledge you when you are different from them? How can you show kindness towards someone who is different from you? Can you think of a time when someone was kind to you? As a facilitator of cross-cultural exchanges, you can also actively observe, identify, and celebrate student behaviors and show respect and other strengths like empathy, thoughtfulness, and humility. For example, express gratitude to your students when they actively listen and thoughtfully respond to each other during a conversation, point it out to them, express that gratitude to them. That's a big part of celebrating, discussing it, modeling it, and celebrating, practicing that kindness skill. And then to build collaboration skills, challenge students to find ways to use their differences to better their communities and the world. How can differences become strengths in their collaboration and empower the whole group? One simple way to introduce and reinforce collaboration in the classroom is to read stories that emphasize teamwork and how cooperating is better than competing with each other. Another way is to help students assign roles in group projects. For example, students might share their strengths and weaknesses with each other. Excuse me. Then consider roles like a facilitator who makes sure everyone does their part, a liaison who communicates with the educators, a team tutor who makes sure the group understands the topic and any relevant context, and the recorder who records and organizes the group's work. In this way, collaboration can foster deeper connections among students and lead to better and more creative problem solving. And again, these are all skills that and practices that can be weaved into a language learning classroom. It's a great way to practice language, to put students and have them in these roles, and in different roles. You know, if you're the recorder, you're practicing writing skills. If you are the liaison, you're practicing verbal communication and also active listening in that language. So these are all practices that can be built into a language learning classroom, and into cross-cultural exchanges as well. To wrap up, at Empatico, we incorporate these 9 skills on our platform by supporting live video conversations between classrooms and asynchronous collaborative cross-classroom projects. We provide simple lesson plans to help structure these exchanges and reinforce all of these 9 skills in the framework that you see up here on the screen again. This is actually, it's a little bit earlier than expected. I went a little bit faster. I apologize, Joel, but this is a great moment to bring Joel back in to talk about how we're working together on these cultural exchanges through the Macmillan Virtual Classroom Exchange. And I will say one final thank you. I'm still here, but I'll kind of let Joel take over. One final thank you for having me today and letting me speak.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. And I think you can now take a big gulp of water. That cough just wouldn't leave you alone the whole time.
Thank you. I know. It just, of course, it happens to, like, I have no cough the rest of the week and this morning right now.
But it was brilliant. It was a fantastic talk. Thank you. And I think the idea of empathy is so important. And I mentioned earlier to Travis, and I think it's, you know, so important to highlight that I don't know if there's ever been a time where empathy has felt like a more important skill to foster. Maybe it's part of growing up. You start to see the world as being ever more divisive, or maybe it's a unique point in time that we're living in the world. But I think the more we can foster those skills within our students, it's really important, particularly in 2023.
Yeah, and the importance of modeling them too, not only like fostering them within our students, but also practicing them ourselves. I completely agree.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just going to have a quick look in the Q&A, Lauren, to see if anyone had any questions.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like there's anything that Will hasn't already addressed or answered. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and I'll answer them. But that was great, Lauren. And I will take over now, because I think this nicely leads on to what I want to talk about. And like Lauren said, the work that we're doing at Macmillan Education and with the team at Empatico. So I will begin to share my screen, and I'll ask for the same favor if someone can just give me a thumbs up that they can see the screen. Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about Gateway to the World and our virtual classroom exchange, which we're delivering in partnership with Empatico. And the title of the talk today was about crossing the cultural exchange. I like to think of culture almost like an iceberg. And apart from being very nice to photograph and being quite dangerous to boats, culture is like an iceberg in the sense that most of it sits below the water, and lots of what we see in culture is just that top 10%, which we often talk about: food and clothing and dance, arts and music. These are the things that we often know about other cultures and are exposed to about other cultures. But what is often below the surface that we don't see are things like the relationships and roles in a culture, the beliefs and values in the culture, and the attitudes and norms in the culture. I can see people in the chat here from all over the world. I've seen Georgia, Czech Republic, I've seen Mexico, Argentina. All of us have a unique culture, and all of us have a unique perspective and thing to say about our culture. And if you think about your students, think about what would they want to share about their culture if they had the chance. Lauren presented loads of practical tips for how we can foster empathy through virtual classroom exchanges. And I want to talk more about some of the more practical implementations and the how we can implement those skills of cross-cultural awareness, intercultural communication, developing a positive, open-minded attitude, and critical and creative thinking amongst our students. Interacting with these learners worldwide with other classrooms will really help the students develop all of those skills that we mentioned. And it also helps students break traditionally held views of other cultures, but maybe their own as well. It helps them discover different points of view on their culture and that area of the iceberg that sits below the surface. Traditionally, I think in teaching materials of the past, we've been very focused on that top 10% of what food is eaten around the world, what dances are performed around the world. I think these virtual exchanges can really help us discover a bit more below the surface. And I can say from my own personal experience of living in another country, it's when you start to explore and experience that 90% that sits below the water that you can really feel like you can get to know people on a deeper level and create deeper connections with people, which obviously from a language learning point of view is incredibly powerful in terms of conversations you can have and the relationships you can establish. The other positive of facilitating and creating these exchanges on a virtual level with classrooms around the world is we can really open this up to every student, no matter where they sit on a socioeconomic scale. These sorts of exchanges are something that has always been done in a sense, but not virtually. Often in the past, schools would do exchange programs with other schools, but this might have been reserved for students whose parents were able to pay for them to go and visit another country for a week. Through a virtual exchange, we can make this available to absolutely every student in our class. And I think that's a really powerful tool. This also helps strengthen students' life skills. And those of you who are familiar with Gateway know that life skills has always been a core idea of the course. And it really does have so many benefits above and beyond these skills and the empathy skills that Lauren talked about earlier. So how can you begin to implement these practices in your classroom? You've heard today about all of the benefits, but how can you get started? Well, as I mentioned, at Macmillan Education, we've partnered with Empatico to create a unique community of classrooms, of secondary classes around the world, and facilitate their connections to create these exchanges. And we'll look at how that's done shortly. Through the Gateway to the World course, we have a number of resources, units, and projects, collaborative projects, and Lauren talked a lot about collaboration in her empathy framework. These collaborative projects occur every second unit in Gateway to the World, and these offer students the framework to create an output for these virtual exchanges that the virtual classroom exchange facilitates. In 2021, we did a survey with secondary teachers, and more than half of them told us that encouraging communication in English between their students was one of their biggest challenges. The virtual classroom exchange really helps with that because it gives students a real meaningful and tangible reason for communication with their partner class. So we bring together classes from different cultures to facilitate the presentation and the exchanging of ideas and the exchanging of their collaborative project outputs. So this all sounds very exciting, but I'm sure you're asking how you get started. It's really, really simple. There's a very, very simple sign-up process to register your class, where you simply need to tell us about your student's age, the interests and the topic areas that matter to your class. You tell us where your school is and the time zones your school sits in, and you let us know what days of the week you tend to have your class, whether they're in the early morning, late morning, early afternoon, or the late afternoon. And that's really it. Once you provide us with those details and you add those details to the platform, you're part of an educator community. You are part of the virtual classroom exchange community. You can see here an example of all of the classes that you can connect with, and you can connect with as many classes as you want. You'll see examples here of classes in the United States, in Turkey, in Great Britain, but we have classes already registered from every single corner of the world. It really is up to you who you'd like to exchange with, and you can create as many connections as you wish. You can send requests to connect with your partner class. You can check where their schedule overlaps with yours so that you can check you have classes at the same time. And you can see them as part of your community, of your connections. You can send your partner teacher messages, and you can schedule a meeting on whatever platform you're already using, whether it be Zoom, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams. Your calendars will sync with your partner class so you can see when you have the overlapping time. And this is really a tool that just makes these virtual classroom exchanges that we've heard all the benefits about so very simple. At every step of the way, you'll receive messages and updates about any exchanges, any messages you've received, any invites from other partner classes, and you'll always be contacted and kept up to date with how your exchange is going. Once you've done all that, you are ready to explore the world with your class. You're ready to start performing the exchanges, and you can do as many as you want or as few as you want. It might be something you want to do once a year, once a term. It might be something that your students ask to do more often, because, as we say, the benefits are real with a virtual classroom exchange, and those skills that students can develop are so important. We really believe that once your students have completed one exchange, they'll want to do more and more, and you can connect with classes from different parts of the world. It might sound overwhelming, but don't worry, there is plenty of support available at all times. We have a dedicated support email address for the virtual classroom exchange. So any technical support you might need, support is available at all times. The Teachers Resource Centre with Gateway to the World is full of resources to enhance and facilitate your teacher exchange, and it includes a detailed teacher's guide on how to get the most out of your virtual exchange, including some of the hints and tips that Lauren mentioned today on fostering that empathy. And you can even access the virtual classroom exchange directly from the Macmillan Education Teachers app. That's a very quick overview of this simple way to sign your class up and register for the virtual classroom exchange if you're a Gateway to the World user. If you want to learn more about Gateway to the World and the virtual classroom exchange, please visit macmillanenglish.com/gateway to the world, and hopefully the link will be dropped in the chat as we speak. If your students are already using Gateway to the World and you'd like to sign your class up for the virtual classroom exchange, you can go straight to macmillanenglish.com/VCE, pop in those few class details, and you'll be ready to start exchanging. If you want further information, Will or somebody will drop in the chat shortly a link to contact your local representative, whoever's in your area, in your country, in your region, who will be able to give you any further information you might wish. So the virtual classroom exchange and Gateway to the World is a tool we have created at Macmillan Education in partnership with Empatico to help you as teachers connect your classes to other classes around the world, and to start fostering and creating those intercultural communication skills. And I think that's it from me. If there's any questions, I will get to them in the Q&A, or I'm sure will tell me any that I might have missed.
Hi, Joel. Thanks very
hello.
much. Hi. Thank you very much. Thanks, Lauren, as well. Thanks, both of you. What an amazing set of talks. Thank you very much for putting it all together. Really, really interesting stuff.
I think we need to thank Lauren most because she was up at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's a far more sociable hour for me.
No, Joel, I think, Lauren, you can't have been up at 6. You started speaking at 6 o'clock.
I was up earlier, but again, time is invented. We're not thinking about that. Actually, you can see it's getting sunny outside right now.
Still another 4 months till we see the sun in London, I'm sure. So
yeah. So we've got a couple of questions actually. So the first one is from Maria. A question for either of you. Can you recommend any books about this topic?
So, I'll go, Lauren. I mean, if you're talking about resources, Maria, to implement this in your class, I can't recommend highly enough Gateway to the World. But if you're talking more about any academic texts on intercultural communication, I will have to defer there to you, Lauren. I don't know if you've got any recommendations.
So I'm actually going to take it in a different direction. I think there's a lot of academic texts on this, and we're all in the education field. We're lifelong learners. We know that we can read and learn and kind of expose ourselves to a lot of this information. But a big part of learning is actually like sitting with it and digesting it. So I'm actually going to recommend like exploring the world of fiction to really practice these skills. As we talked about in the presentation, this idea of perspective taking with characters. So this could be used with younger students, with older students, with yourselves, really like sitting with a fiction book and thinking about those characters, putting yourself in their perspective. I think that's a great way to practice this and to really work on kind of implementing it in your own life and implementing it with your students.
I love that idea. That's great.
A really interesting answer. Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah.
So we've had a couple of questions, Joel, on LinkedIn about the virtual classroom exchange. So a question from somebody who is a professional independent teacher with students. They're asking if they can do it as an independent teacher, and is there an extra charge for students to use the platform?
If students are using the Gateway to the World coursebook, there's no extra charge for using the virtual classroom exchange. It's part of the course. It's available to all teachers using the Gateway to the World coursebook. The idea is that the students go through the unit and gain the language and the knowledge to be able to do the collaborative projects which appear every second unit in Gateway to the World, and that's their framework project output for the virtual classroom exchange. So no, there's no extra charge, but it's important that the students have the material to be able to build up to those collaborative projects.
Okay. Okay, a question from someone on Facebook. Can you recommend any kind of warm-up activity, a game, they've said game, or any kind of warm-up activity that you can recommend that teachers do with their students to warm up a class, to do at the beginning, a quick thing at the beginning that they can do to raise their skills of empathy?
One of my favorite ones, I know it as one word whip. That's the name of this game that I've always learned it as. But it's really starting, again, we've talked about really checking in with yourself first and being able to name like the emotions that you're feeling, all of that. And what one word whip is, it's a quick check-in with whatever group that you're with. And you just go around and you say one word that describes how you're feeling in that moment. And it's a great way to practice that self-reflection for your students and to also hear how others are feeling around them. And so that they can see, maybe they're feeling very similarly to another student, or maybe they're feeling very differently to another student. And it's a good reminder that we are all living lives at the exact same time and interacting with each other and going through different things at the same time as we're interacting with each other. And I think that is one of my absolute favorite warm-ups that just gets you in a space of like, this is how I'm feeling, this is how others are feeling. Now let's move forward recognizing that.
That's great.
Brilliant.
That's a great one. It's really nice.
Thanks a lot, Lauren.
Yeah.
Another one I think for you, Lauren, question from Sean. It's kind of two questions. So the first one is how to detect as a teacher how to minimize bullying. They're talking about sort of bullying due to cultural differences. I'm sure you could probably deliver a weekend of training on this, but you can do it in about 5 words.
In 5 words, in 1 word. We talked about 1 word whip. Let's do it 1 word. Wow, that is a very complicated question. I think one space is to really be proactive with building these empathy skills, and get students thinking from the beginning, get students thinking about their own emotions and thinking about others' emotions from the start, because then that will also help once conflict arises. You know, we all know that conflict is a part of life, and that, I mean, conflict and bullying are 2 separate things. I'm not equating them to each other, but conflict does arise. And I think if we are proactively building those skills of being able to put yourself in another's shoes, when we come into those spaces of conflict or bullying in this case, you're not starting from scratch when you're working to address the situation that's happening. You've got some skills that you can work with and build on of, okay, stepping back and saying, hey, this is a situation that has affected another student. Let's talk this through. How did this make this other student feel? And then working from there. I guess in 1 word, being proactive with building these empathy skills. That was more than 1 word, but pretend I hyphenated it.
Yeah. Big hyphen. Yeah, great. And the second part of that question from the same person, thanks for these questions, Sean, these really interesting questions. The second one is, so during your talk, Lauren, you were talking about what empathy is and how you could address it in class. And Sean wants to know how to sort of bridge the gap between a teacher giving them that information and then taking it to the next stage of giving them opportunities and skills and ways of internalizing the essence, as Sean's put it, internalizing the essence of empathy so that it's not just a mere lecture from a teacher.
That's a great question, because that is a risk that you run. You know, you don't want it just to be a lecture and that the lesson isn't actually being learned. I think reflection is a big part of that, and being intentional about creating space to reflect. And so this could be, you know, we talked about journaling, and using journaling to recognize your own emotions. And again, that could be a great way. We're talking about language practice. That's a great space to practice language. But then also, even if you think about other activities, if you're doing like a skit or something in class, that's a common activity that happens in a language learning class. If you do a skit, taking some time afterwards to reflect on what happened in that skit. We had multiple people, they were feeling different things. This action happened, and these different people felt different things after that action happened. And really allowing your students to not only reflect on their own, but also giving them a space to reflect together, because that's also a part of learning. You know, we don't learn in isolation. We don't learn, it's kind of like what we talked about with that last question of like, we can read, we can hear all these things, but in order to really learn something, we have to practice it not only on our own, but with others. So I think, again, this is another question that could have a whole nother webinar topic, but being intentional about creating a space to reflect, I think, is very, very important in the process of not just like lecturing at students, but actually ensuring that they're internalizing those lessons.
Thanks, Lauren. And I think a lot of the teachers here are English language teachers, if not all. I think most teachers that are here teach English as a second or other or foreign language. What role does language have to play in those conversations? Do you think it's imperative that they use English, or do you think there's room for flexibility there?
I mean, I'm going to say I understand that we are in a space with a majority of English language teachers. I think there is plenty of flexibility there. You know, language in and of itself is fluid and constantly changing, and we see that with I'll speak from personal experience. So I'm in Los Angeles, California, in the United States, very, very, very diverse city. The English that I speak has so many other languages thrown in there. Like I don't say flip-flops, I say chanclas, I say chancletas. I've said that since I was born. Like, there is space and incorporating and recognizing that language is fluid helps with that perspective taking. This is, when I use that word, it's a recognition and a respect of other languages and other perspectives as well. And I do think that language plays a big role in this, and the fluidity of language also plays a huge role in building empathy.
Completely agree. Thanks, Lauren.
Absolutely.
Joel, a question for you on the virtual classroom exchange. How do teachers find partner classes?
So partner classes, teachers are able to select their partner class. They're presented with a selection of classes based on the times they've said their classes are, the interests that they've marked as being important to their class. So the class that they partner with, or classes, is really up to the teacher, and they can explore all of those as part of the community on the Empatico platform. So my suggestion to answer that question is head to macmillanenglish.com/gateway to the world. Look at all of the information about the virtual classroom exchange, and you'll be able to see how the process works and how you can select your partner class, or how your partner class can select you.
Thanks, Joel. I'm just putting that link in there. So that's the link. I'm just going to put a couple of links in. So alerts, everybody highlight here. There's a couple of links coming in the chat box. So that first one is to Gateway to the World, the English language course for teenagers. This is to the virtual classroom exchange information page. And this final one is, if you would like to speak to Macmillan about this, form to contact you. I hope you understand that. This is the form for us to contact you if you would like to learn more, if you want to speak to us about Gateway to the World, about the virtual classroom exchange, about Empatico. Just use that form and we'll be straight in touch with you. I think I just wanted to sort of just get that out of the way, just to make sure everyone's got it all in one go. So just once again, before I go, thank you so much, Lauren, for putting together such an interesting talk. It's something we haven't spoken about here before.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure, thanks. And of course, Joel, great to see you again, as we do on a far too regular basis, I've got to say.
Never enough, Will. It's never enough.
Agreed. Great to have you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you.
And just before we go, I've got a couple of bits to say. Before we go, dramatic pause. Wait a second. Share screen. There we go. Joel and Laura, can you see that all right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. So you've got that form. I've just put that in the chat box. If you want to speak to a Macmillan education rep from your area, just fill in that form, send it off, and we'll be in touch. We've had this question, I think, today in this webinar, this particular webinar, more than we've had it, I think, in the last year. Lots and lots of people are asking about certificates today, which is great. But just to sort of answer you all in one go, you will be getting a certificate of attendance. If you're watching on Zoom, you registered for this event, which is why you got the link to come. So we've got your details and we will email that to you. Within the next week, you're going to get an email from us and it'll have your certificate on there and a couple of other special bits and pieces that we're giving away to you as well. If you're watching on social media, there should be a link in the chat box, which will take you to a place where you can download the certificate for today's session as well. So do keep an eye out for that. So that's to answer your question. Yes, you are getting a certificate and it's going to arrive into your email inbox within the next week. And before we go, I've got something very important to tell you about. On the 13th of February, we are opening our next Global Teachers Festival. From the 13th to the 24th of February, we're running it every day for those 2 weeks, every working day, Monday to Friday for those 2 weeks. We've got all sorts of topics, all sorts of speakers. We're talking about things such as international Englishes. We're talking about the science of learning. We're talking about motivating teenagers. We're talking about helping young learners transition into teenagehood. We're talking about connecting with young learners nowadays. That's just a handful, just the thing, those are a few topics off the top of my head. And you can see a lot of the speakers we've got coming up are some of our very close friends and some new friends as well. So do come along, have a look, macmillanenglish.com/GTF to register now. It's very simple to register, by the way, and all the program is on there for you to browse. So do go and take a look at that. And that's it. See you again soon. Thanks a lot, Lauren, again, for getting up so early. Have a lovely session later on. Same to you, Joel.
Thanks.
Once again.
Cheers, Will. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Bye.